Hello everyone. Tonight, we're stepping into a story that begins at a Christmas table where the lights are warm, the roast is perfect, and a daughter looks her mother in the eye and calls her a freeloader. This is Narratives of Aunt Maris, where Black women's stories in America are told honestly with every slammed door, forged signature, and late-night prayer still attached. Picture this. You're standing in the doorway of what used to be your own dining room, holding small wrapped gifts you bought with the last of your Social Security check. Your son-in-law is eating in your late husband's chair, your grandkids are glued to their phones, and your daughter says, "The greatest gift you can give us this Christmas is to disappear from our lives." You sleep in a cheap motel, wake up to a fraud alert from your bank, and then discover the house you were thrown out of was still legally half yours until someone quietly made you sign it away. And here's the hard reality check. If you ever find yourself in a moment like that, you might not walk away with your sanity or your heart still intact. So before you get too comfortable, take a moment to like this video and subscribe, but only if you truly enjoy what I'm doing here. And while you're here, drop a comment with where you're watching from and what time it is for you right now. I love seeing how far these stories travel, from big cities to small towns, from night shift breaks to quiet bedrooms where you're finally alone with your thoughts. Now, turn off the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for a little soft background noise. And let's begin tonight's journey together. My daughter said, "The greatest gift you can give us this Christmas is to stop being a freeloader and disappear from our lives." In that moment, I didn't cry or beg. I just packed my things, closed the door in silence. But what I did the next day, I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from so I can see how far my story has reached. The greatest Christmas gift you could give us is to stop being a freeloader and disappear from our lives. AR's words hit me like a physical blow. I stood there in the doorway of what used to be my own dining room, holding the small wrapped presents I'd bought with the last of my Social Security money, watching my daughter's face twist with disgust as she looked at me. The whole family was there. My son-in-law Jamal sat at the head of the table where my late husband used to sit, not even bothering to look up from his prime rib. My two grandchildren, Maya and Jalen, kept their eyes glued to their phones. Their silence somehow worse than Rochelle's cruelty. Even my sister Yvonne, who I'd driven 3 hours to pick up for dinner, just stared at her plate. "Rochelle, please," I whispered, my voice barely audible over the sudden ringing in my ears. "It's Christmas," she laughed, a sound that used to fill me with joy when she was little. Now it felt like broken glass in my chest. "Christmas? You mean the holiday where you show up empty-handed, expecting us to feed you and entertain you like you're some kind of guest instead of the burden you've become?" I looked around the room desperately, searching for one sympathetic face. Maya, my 17-year-old granddaughter, glanced up briefly, but when her mother shot her a warning look, she quickly returned to her phone. Jalen didn't even acknowledge my presence. "I brought gifts," I said weakly, holding up the small bag. The presents inside suddenly felt pathetic. A handmade scarf or a book for Jamal. Small things I'd crafted or found at thrift stores because my monthly check barely covered rent and groceries. Oh, more junk from the dollar store. Jamal finally spoke, his voice dripping with disdain. "Just what we need to clutter up the house?" Rochelle stood up. Her designer dress probably costing more than I spent on food in 2 months. Mom, look around. This house, this life we've built, we did it without you. We don't need your charity gifts. And we certainly don't need you treating our home like your personal restaurant. The room spun slightly. I gripped the door frame to steady myself. This was my house. All your father and I was, she interrupted sharply, past tense. Daddy's been gone for 8 years, and you've been living off our generosity ever since. Well, we're done. Jamal and I are trying to build something here, and frankly, having a dependent mother hanging around all the time is embarrassing. Each word was carefully chosen to wound. I could see it in her eyes. The satisfaction she took in finally saying what she'd apparently been thinking for years. When had my little girl, the one who used to crawl into my bed during thunderstorms, become this cold stranger? I helped raise your children, I said, my voice starting to shake. When you went back to work, who watched Maya and Jalen? You didn't have anywhere else to go. Jamal interjected. Don't act like you were doing us favors. You needed a place to live. Yvonne finally looked up. Maybe we should all just calm down. No, I'll cut her off. I'm tired of pretending. Mom, you've been a weight around our necks for years. You don't contribute anything except guilt and obligations. Your own sister doesn't even want to deal with you anymore, do you? Aunt Yvonne. I turned to Yvonne, my heart breaking as she avoided my eyes. We'd been close once before her husband got that promotion, and they moved to the suburbs before I became the poor sister who needed help. I think, Yvonne said carefully, maybe some space would be good for everyone. That's when I knew it was over. Not just this conversation, but everything. 8 years of believing I still had a family, of thinking I was helping, of convincing myself that even if money was tight, at least I wasn't alone. You want me to disappear? I asked, my voice steadying as something cold settled in my chest. Fine. I turned toward the guest room where I'd been staying for the past 3 months since my landlord raised the rent and I couldn't afford the apartment anymore. My hands shook as I pulled out the old suitcase. The same one I'd used when Harold and I went on our honeymoon 42 years ago. Behind me, I could hear them resuming their dinner conversation as if nothing had happened. Jamal talking about some business deal, Mia asking if she could spend New Year's with friends. Normal family chatter that no longer included me. I folded my few belongings carefully. 3 dresses, 2 pairs of shoes, some underwear and sweaters, the photos of Rochelle as a baby, her first steps, first day of school. Should I take them? Did they even matter anymore when the child in those pictures had grown up to hate me, Grandma? I turned to find Jalen standing in the doorway. At 15, he was already taller than his father with Harold's gentle eyes. For a moment, hope flickered in my chest. Are you really leaving? He asked quietly. I nodded, not trusting my voice. He hesitated, glancing back toward the dining room where we could hear his parents' voices. I'm sorry, he whispered, then quickly disappeared. That small kindness almost broke me. Almost. But something inside me had shifted during Rochelle's speech. A clarity I hadn't felt in years was settling over me, cold and sharp as winter air. I zipped up the suitcase and walked back through the living room. They were all still at the table, picking at their dessert now. Beautiful people in a beautiful house playing at being a beautiful family. I'll be out of your way, I said calmly. Rochelle looked up, perhaps expecting tears or begging. When she saw neither, something flickered across her face. Surprised disappointment. "Good," she said, but her voice sounded less certain now.
I set my key on the coffee table, the same table where used to do her homework while I made dinner in the kitchen that was no longer mine, where she'd planned her wedding while I listened and offered suggestions that were politely ignored. "Goodbye," I said simply. And then I walked out into the December cold, closing the door quietly behind me. No slamming, no dramatic exit, just a soft click that seemed to echo through my chest. As I loaded my suitcase into my 20-year-old Honda, I could see them through the dining room window. They'd already returned to their meal, their laughter carrying across the yard like mockery. I sat in my car for a moment, engine running, warm air starting to clear the fog from my windshield. 8 years of this. 8 years of believing I was family when I was really just a burden they'd finally decided to shed. But as I pulled away from the house where I'd once been welcome, where I'd once belonged, I felt something unexpected. Not just pain or rejection, relief. Whatever came next, wherever I went, I wouldn't have to pretend anymore that I was wanted where I wasn't. I wouldn't have to smile through another dinner where my presence was tolerated rather than cherished. For the first time in years, I was free to stop trying to earn love that would never come. I had no idea then what I would discover in the morning, what I would learn about my daughter, about myself, about the true cost of family loyalty. But driving through the dark streets with nowhere to go, I felt something stirring inside me that had been dormant for too long. My own voice, my own choices, my own life. And I was just beginning to understand how much of it I'd given away. The motel room smelled like industrial disinfectant and old cigarettes. I sat on the edge of the bed, still wearing my Christmas dress, staring at my phone. It had been 18 hours since I'd walked out of Rochelle's house, and the silence was deafening.
Not one call, not one text, not even from Jalen, who'd whispered that apology in the doorway. I'd driven aimlessly for 2 hours Christmas night, crying until my eyes burned before finally pulling into a Super 8 of Highway 94. The desk clerk, a tired L-looking woman about my age, had been kind enough to give me the senior discount without my asking. Small mercies. Now, in the harsh, fluorescent light of morning, reality was setting in. I had $847 in my checking account. My next Social Security payment wasn't due for 2 weeks. I needed to find somewhere to live fast. I picked up my phone and scrolled through my contacts. The list was smaller than I'd realized. Most of our old friends had drifted away after Harold died, and the few who remained were more Rochelle's friends now than mine. Yvonne was clearly off limits after yesterday's betrayal. My neighbor from the old apartment might let me sleep on her couch for a few days. But Mrs. Jenkins was 83 and barely managing on her own. The phone remained silent in my hands. No one was coming to save me. No one was even checking to see if I was okay. I thought about Harold then. Really thought about him for the first time in months without the distraction of family drama. He'd been my anchor for 34 years. The steady presence that made everything else manageable. When he died of that sudden heart attack at 57, I'd felt like half of myself had been ripped away. Rochelle had been wonderful then. She'd handled the funeral arrangements, helped me sort through his belongings, insisted I move in with them temporarily while I got back on my feet. For a few months, It had felt like we were closer than we'd ever been. She'd called every day, brought the grandchildren over for dinner, made sure I wasn't drowning in grief. When had it changed? When had her compassion turned to resentment? I walked to the small bathroom and looked at myself in the mirror. At 65, I looked older than I should. The stress of the past few years had carved lines around my eyes that makeup couldn't hide. My brown hair, once thick and shiny, had gone completely gray. When had I stopped taking care of myself? When had I started seeing myself through their eyes? A burden, a responsibility, a reminder of everything they didn't want to become. My phone buzzed. For a moment, my heart leaped. Maybe Jalen, maybe even Alara calling to apologize, to say they'd been awful and could I please come home? It was a text from my bank. Your account balance is below $50. Consider setting up account alerts to avoid overdraft fees. I stared at the message, confused. Yesterday morning, I'd had over $800. I checked specifically because I wanted to make sure I could afford Christmas presents. I logged into my banking app, my hands shaking as I navigated to my transaction history. There it was. A withdrawal yesterday at 3:47 p.m. for $800 from an ATM I'd never used in a location I'd never been. My stomach dropped. I called the bank immediately, navigating through the automated system with growing panic. I'm showing a withdrawal yesterday afternoon from your checking account, the customer service representative said after I'd verified my identity 3 times. Did you authorize this transaction? No, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. I was at my daughter's house all day. I never made that withdrawal. I see. Well, you'll need to file a fraud report. However, I should mention that the withdrawal was made using your debit card and PIN number, so the investigation process could take several weeks. Several weeks. I had $47 to my name and nowhere to live. And it would take weeks to get my money back. Can you tell me which ATM it was? I asked, though I was beginning to suspect I already knew. The Walmart on Riverside Drive, 3 blocks from Rochelle's house. The same Walmart where she always sent me to pick up last-minute groceries when she was cooking for the family. The same Walmart where she'd been with me just last week when I'd used that exact ATM to withdraw money for Christmas shopping. When she'd stood right behind me, watching me enter my PIN. I hung up the phone and sat in the silence of that cheap motel room. Pieces clicking together in my mind like a jigsaw puzzle I hadn't wanted to complete. The timing, the location, the fact that she'd kicked me out with such venom, such finality, as if she'd been planning it. My own daughter had stolen from me, and then, adding insult to injury, she'd made sure I was homeless and humiliated before I'd even discovered the theft. I thought about all the times over the past few years when she'd borrowed my card to pick up groceries or run errands. How many times had she memorized my PIN? How long had she been planning this? I pulled out the file folder I always kept with my important papers and spread everything on the bed. Social Security statements, Medicare information, my lease agreement from the apartment I could no longer afford. And there, tucked behind my insurance cards, were documents I hadn't looked at in years. The deed to the house where Rochelle now lived. I'd forgotten. Or maybe I'd forced myself to forget. When Harold died, the house had still been in both our names. I'd signed some papers during those grief-stricken weeks, trusting to handle the legal details while I tried to figure out how to exist without my husband.
I pulled out the deed with trembling fingers. There it was, in black and white. Carolyn Rhodes and Rochelle Turner, joint tenants with right of survivorship. Joint tenants. I still owned half of that house. The house I'd been thrown out of like an unwanted guest. The house where they'd called me a freeloader. But there was more paperwork behind the deed. Documents I didn't remember signing with official-looking letterheads and my signature at the bottom. I squinted at the legal language, trying to make sense of it. A quitclaim deed dated 18 months ago, transferring my half of the property to Rochelle and Jamal for the sum of $1 and other valuable consideration. I don't remember signing this. I would never have signed this, whether there was my signature, witnessed, and notarized. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely hold the papers. Not only had Rochelle stolen my money yesterday, she'd apparently stolen my house 2 years ago. And I'd been so trusting, so grateful to have somewhere to live that I'd never questioned it. How stupid could I have been? How blind? I thought about every family dinner where they'd subtly reminded me of their generosity. Every time Jamal had made comments about property taxes and maintenance costs, every guilt trip about being a burden, all while they were living in a house that was legally half mine, the worst part wasn't the theft. It wasn't even the betrayal. It was the realization that my daughter had looked me in the eye for months, maybe years. Knowing what she'd done, watching me struggle with rent, watching me scrimp and save, watching me feel grateful for their scraps of affection. And she'd felt nothing. No guilt, no remorse, just annoyance that I wasn't grateful enough for my own stolen property. I picked up my phone and started to dial's number, then stopped. What would I say? What could I say that would penetrate the wall of selfishness she'd built around herself? Instead, I opened my laptop, the one gift Harold had insisted on buying me before he died, saying I needed to stay connected to the world. I'd barely used it except to play solitaire and check my email, but now I had a purpose. I Googled elder financial abuse attorney and started making a list of phone numbers. If wanted me to disappear from her life, she was about to get exactly what she'd asked for. But not before I reminded her that some things, justice, consequences, the truth, don't disappear just because they're inconvenient. For the first time since Christmas dinner, I smiled. It wasn't a particularly nice smile, but it felt good on my face. My daughter had made one crucial mistake in her careful plan to get rid of me. She'd assumed I was as weak as she'd made me feel. She was about to learn otherwise. The law office smelled like expensive leather and fresh coffee. I sat across from Kendra Lewis, a sharp-eyed attorney in her 50s who specialized in elder abuse cases. I'd found her name at the top of every Google search, and her reviews all mentioned one thing. She didn't lose. Mrs. Rhodes, she said, reviewing the documents I'd brought. I have to ask you directly. Do you remember signing this quick claim deed? I shook my head. I remember signing papers after my husband died, but said they were for insurance and Social Security. I wasn't in a good place mentally. I trusted her to handle everything. Kendra nodded, her expression grim. That's unfortunately common. Family members often take advantage during periods of grief when people aren't thinking clearly. She pulled out a magnifying glass and examined my signature closely. This signature looks consistent with your other documents, but that doesn't mean much. if you were coerced or misled about what you were signing, it's still fraud. What about the money she stole yesterday? The ATM withdrawal is more straightforward. That's clear theft. With your testimony about her having access to your PIN and the timing right before she kicked you out, we have a strong case. Kendra leaned back in her chair. But Mrs. Rhodes, I need you to understand something. Fighting family in court is expensive and emotionally draining. Are you prepared for that? I thought about the $47 in my checking account, about sleeping in that motel room, about 18 hours of silence from people who were supposed to love me. What other choice do I have? Kendra smiled for the first time since I'd walked in. Let's start with some research. I want to pull all the public records on your house transactions. Sometimes when people get greedy, they leave a paper trail 2 hours later. Kendra's assistant had compiled a file that made my stomach turn. The quitclaim deed was just the beginning. Your daughter didn't just take your half of the house, Kendra explained, spreading documents across her conference table. 6 months after you signed over your interest, she and her husband took out a second mortgage for $150,000. Then 3 months after that, they refinanced the entire property for $380,000. I stared at the numbers, trying to make sense of them. But the house was only worth about $200,000 when Harold and I bought it. Property values have gone up. But more importantly, they've been using your house as their personal ATM. Look at this. She pointed to a loan document. They've pulled out over $500,000 in equity over the past 18 months. $500,000 from the house Harold and I had scrimped and saved to buy, where we'd raised our daughter, where he'd taught her to ride a bike in the driveway. Where did all that money go, I asked, though I was starting to have a horrible suspicion. Kendra flipped to another document. Jamal started a consulting business called Turner Strategic Solutions. According to these corporate filings, it received a $200,000 startup investment from private family sources. Want to guess where that money came from? My head was spinning. They used my house to fund his business. It gets worse. Kendra's voice was gentle, but relentless. The business failed 6 months ago. They've defaulted on 2 loan payments already, and your house, the one they threw you out of, is in pre-foreclosure. The room tilted slightly. I gripped the arms of my chair, trying to process what I was hearing. They're losing the house. They're 3 months behind on payments. The bank has started foreclosure proceedings. At the current rate, they'll lose the property within 6 months unless they can come up with about $30,000 to bring the loan current. I sat in stunned silence. No wonder had been so vicious, so desperate to get rid of me. It wasn't just that I was a burden. I was a witness to their failure, a reminder of what they'd stolen and squandered. There's something else, Kendra said quietly. I ran a credit check on your daughter as part of my research. She's filed for bankruptcy protection twice in the past 5 years. Both times she listed you as a dependent, claiming she was supporting you financially. The hits kept coming. She claimed I was dependent on her for tax purposes. Yes, she's been claiming you as a dependent while simultaneously taking equity out of your house. It's a pattern of financial abuse that goes back years. I thought about all those times she'd made me feel guilty for living with them, for eating their food, for being a burden, all while she was literally profiting from my dependency, using me as a tax write-off while stealing my property. Can we prove all this, I asked. Kendra gathered the documents back into a neat pile. Mrs. Rhodes, Your daughter has left a paper trail a mile wide. Forged documents, fraudulent loans, tax fraud, elder abuse. She's committed multiple felonies. The question isn't whether we can prove it. The question is what you want to do about it. I stared out the window of the law office, watching people walk by on the sidewalk below. Normal people with normal problems. Not sitting in a lawyer's office discovering that their own child had systematically robbed them blind. What are my options? We can file criminal charges for the theft and fraud. We can sue to avoid the quitclaim deed since it was obtained through deception. We can force the sale of the house and recover your equity, or Kendra paused, studying my face. We can use this information as leverage. What do you mean your daughter is facing foreclosure? She needs money desperately, and she knows she's committed multiple crimes. Sometimes, the threat of exposure is more powerful than actual prosecution. We could negotiate a settlement that gets you what you deserve without putting you through a lengthy court battle. I thought about Faye's Christmas night. The cold satisfaction in her eyes as she called me a freeloader. The way she'd orchestrated my humiliation in front of the entire family. The calculated cruelty of stealing my money right before throwing me out. What kind of settlement? Kendra pulled out a legal pad and started making notes. Well, let's see what she actually owes you. Your half of the house when you signed it over was worth about $100,000. The money she's stolen, including yesterday's ATM withdrawal, adds up to at least $15,000 over the past 2 years that we can document. Then there's the tax fraud using you as a dependent while you were paying your own expenses. She scribbled numbers as she talked. Conservatively, she owes you $150,000 in damages. But given the systematic nature of the abuse and the emotional distress, we could probably argue for much more. $150,000 more money than I'd seen in my entire life. Enough to buy my own place, to live independently, to never have to depend on anyone again. How long would it take to get that money if we sue? Could be years. If we negotiate, Kendra smiled, could be weeks. I made my decision. I want to negotiate. But I have conditions such as I want her to know that I know. I want her to understand exactly what she did and what it's going to cost her. And I want her to have to look me in the eye when she pays me back. Kendra's smile grew wider. Mrs.
Rhodes, I think your daughter is about to get an education in consequences. Are you ready to be her teacher? For the first time in years, I felt truly powerful. Not powerful in the way that comes from manipulation or control, but powerful in the way that comes from truth, from justice, from finally being able to stand up for myself. More than ready, I said. As I left the law office that afternoon, I realized that Rochelle had made a crucial miscalculation. She'd thought that humiliating me and stealing from me would make me disappear quietly, that I'd slink away like a wounded animal and never bother her again. Instead, she'd awakened something in me that had been sleeping for far too long. Something that wouldn't rest until she understood that actions have consequences, even when they're committed against your own mother, especially when they're committed against your own mother. The war was about to begin, and for the first time, I held all the weapons, all. I moved into a small efficiency apartment 3 blocks from Kendra's office. It wasn't much, just a studio with a kitchenette and a Murphy bed, but it was mine. For the first time in 8 years, no one could tell me I didn't belong there. Kendra had been right about leverage.
Within a week of our first meeting, we'd compiled enough evidence to bury in criminal charges. But I wanted more than justice. I wanted her to understand what she'd lost when she chose greed over family. Your daughter called my office yesterday. Kendra told me during our second meeting 3 times. She wants to know what you're planning. I felt a cold satisfaction settle in my chest. She's scared. She should be. I had my investigator do some additional digging. The foreclosure proceedings are moving faster than we thought. She has 6 weeks to come up with $43,000 or lose the house entirely. 6 weeks. In 6 weeks. The house where Harold and I had been so happy, where we'd raised our daughter, where I'd been treated like a servant and then discarded like trash, would belong to the bank. What did you tell her when she called? Kendra smiled. That all communication needed to go through me and that we were still investigating the full extent of the fraud. I may have mentioned that elder abuse cases often result in prison sentences. I'd been staying away from my old neighborhood, but that evening, I found myself driving past the house. 2 cars were in the driveway, ours BMW and Jamal's truck. The Christmas lights were still up, twinkling cheerfully in the January cold. A perfect facade hiding the desperation within. I parked across the street and watched. Through the living room window, I could see figures moving around. It looked like they were having some kind of family meeting, probably trying to figure out how to solve their money problems without admitting what they'd done.
My phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. Mom, this is Jalen. Can we talk? I'm worried about you. My heart clenched. My grandson, the only one who'd shown me any kindness that horrible night. I stared at the message for a long time before responding. I'm okay, sweetheart. Are you? Can I see you? I don't want Mom to know something's going on and they won't tell me and Maya what's happening. I thought about Kendra's warnings about not communicating directly with the family during negotiations, but Jalen was a child caught in the middle of his parents' crimes. He deserved to know that someone still cared about him. Meet me at the Starbucks on 5th Street tomorrow after school. Come alone. The next afternoon, I waited in a corner booth, my hands wrapped around a coffee that had long since gone cold. When Jalen walked in, I barely recognized him. In just 2 weeks, he seemed to have aged years. His face was drawn, his usual easy smile nowhere to be seen. "Grandma," he said, sliding into the booth across from me. For a moment, he looked like he might cry. "I'm so sorry about what Mom said. It was horrible." I reached across the table and squeezed his hand. "You have nothing to apologize for, Jalen. You didn't do anything wrong. But I didn't stand up for you either. I just sat there like a coward. You're 15 years old. It's not your job to manage the adults in your family." He looked down at the table, fidgeting with a sugar packet. "Things have been really weird since Christmas. Mom and Dad keep having these whispered conversations that stop when Maya and I walk in. And yesterday, some official-looking woman came to the house with papers. Mom was crying after she left the foreclosure notice. They'd received the final warning. Jalen," I said carefully, "has your mom ever talked to you about money problems?" He nodded miserably. "She said Dad's business failed, and they might have to sell the house. She blamed it on you somehow. Said that having to support you for all these years had drained their savings. But that doesn't make sense because you always paid for your own stuff. Didn't you, smart boy? Too smart for his own good in a family built on lies. Your mother is going through a difficult time," I said, choosing my words carefully. Sometimes when people are scared, they look for someone to blame,
instead of taking responsibility for their choices. "Are you going to come back?" he asked suddenly. I know what she said was awful, but families are supposed to forgive each other, right? I looked at my grandson's hopeful face and felt my heart break all over again. How could I explain that forgiveness required acknowledgement of wrongdoing? That his mother had stolen from me, lied to me, used me, and then discarded me without a second thought. Some things can't be undone, Jalen. But that doesn't mean I don't love you and Maya. That will never change. Mom said you were probably homeless now. Are you, no, sweetheart?
I have a place to live. I'm okay. He studied my face, clearly wanting to ask more questions, but not sure how. Finally, he said, "Will you text me sometimes so I know you're all right?" Of course. After Jalen left, I sat in that Starbucks for another hour, thinking about family and loyalty and the price of truth. My grandson loved me, but he also loved his mother. Soon, he'd have to reconcile those feelings with the reality of who she really was. I drove home to my little apartment and called Kendra. "I want to make the offer," I said without preamble. "Are you sure we could probably get more if we take it to court?" "I'm sure, but I want to deliver it in person." Kendra was quiet for a moment. "That's not typically how these things work, Mrs. Rhodes. Usually, we handle everything through attorneys to avoid emotional confrontations. I don't want to avoid the confrontation. I want to see her face when she realizes what she's lost." "All right, I'll draft the settlement offer. Full restitution of $150,000 paid over 5 years with interest. In exchange, you agree not to pursue criminal charges. But Mrs. Rhodes, if she accepts this offer, it means she admits no wrongdoing. Are you prepared for that? She'll know what she did. That's enough." 3 days later, Kendra called with news I'd been expecting. She wants to meet tomorrow 2:00 at my office. She's bringing her own attorney. I hung up and looked around my small apartment. In 24 hours, this nightmare would either be over or just beginning. Either way, was about to learn that there were consequences for treating people as disposable. I spent that evening going through the few photo albums I'd managed to save. Pictures of Rochelle as a baby, as a toddler, graduating from high school and college. In every photo, she was smiling, surrounded by people who loved her. Harold and I had given her everything we could. Love, support, opportunities, a stable home, When had that bright, happy child turned into someone who could steal from her own mother without a moment's guilt? I closed the album and put it away. Tomorrow wasn't about the past. It was about the future. Mine and hers. The next morning, I dressed carefully in my best outfit, a navy blue suit I'd worn to Harold's funeral. I wanted to look dignified, strong, like someone who couldn't be pushed around anymore. As I walked into Kendra's office building, I thought about all the ways this confrontation could go. Lara might cry, might apologize, might beg for forgiveness. She might also lie, deny everything, try to manipulate me one more time. But for the first time in years, it didn't matter what she did or said. I had the truth on my side and the law behind me. She'd stolen from me, abused me, discarded me like I was nothing. Now it was time for her to pay the price. And I was going to make sure she understood exactly what that price was and why she'd earned every penny of it. The conference room felt like a courtroom.
Kendra sat to my right, a stack of evidence neatly arranged in front of her. Across the table, Rochelle looked smaller than I remembered, her usual confidence replaced by barely concealed panic. Her attorney, a nervous-looking man in an ill-fitting suit, kept shuffling through papers as if he could find some miracle defense in his briefcase. Jamal wasn't there. Business meeting had explained when Kendra asked. We both knew the truth. He was too much of a coward to face what they'd done. Mrs. Mitchell, Kendra began, her voice coolly professional. My client is prepared to offer you a settlement agreement that would resolve this matter without criminal prosecution. Rochelle's eyes darted between Kendra and me. I could see her trying to read my expression, looking for some sign of the weak, grateful woman she'd bullied for years. She wasn't going to find her. What kind of settlement? Allah's lawyer asked. Kendra slid a document across the table. Full restitution of $150,000 for the fraudulent transfer of property and theft of funds to be paid over 5 years at 6% interest. In exchange, Mrs. Rhodes agrees not to pursue criminal charges for elder abuse, fraud, and theft. Rochelle's face went white as she read the terms. $150,000, that's impossible. We don't have that kind of money. You had it when you stole it from my client, Kendra replied calmly. The fact that you've squandered it doesn't negate your obligation to return it. I never stole anything. Rochelle's voice was shrill now, the mask finally slipping. I took care of her for years. I fed her, housed her, supported her when no one else would. I spoke for the first time since entering the room with my own money in my own house. Rochelle whirled to face me, her eyes blazing with the same fury I'd seen Christmas night. Your house. You signed it over willingly. Show her the documents, I said quietly to Kendra. Kendra opened a folder and spread out copies of the quitclaim deed, the loan documents, the corporate filings for Jamal failed business. Your daughter obtained your signature through fraud, Mrs. Rhodes. She told you these were insurance papers, then used your house as collateral for over $500,000 in loans. Allah's lawyer was reading over the papers, his face growing more grim by the minute. Rochelle, he whispered. You didn't tell me about any of this. It's not what it looks like, said desperately. Mom was confused after Dad died. She wanted me to handle everything. She said she trusted me to make the right decisions. I trusted you, I said, my voice steady despite the pain in my chest. And you used that trust to rob me blind. Kendra pulled out another document. This is particularly interesting. Your daughter claimed you as a dependent on her tax returns for the past 3 years, receiving substantial tax benefits while simultaneously charging you rent to live in what was legally your own house. Ours lawyer dropped his pen. You charged your mother rent to live in her own house. It wasn't her house anymore. Allah snapped. She signed it over. And yes, she paid utilities and groceries because she was living there. That's normal. While you were claiming her as a dependent and telling the IRS you were supporting her financially, Kendra added, that's tax fraud. The room fell silent except for the sound of Rochelle's rapid breathing. I watched my daughter, this stranger wearing my daughter's face, as the reality of her situation finally sank in. What happens if I don't sign this? She asked finally. Kendra's smile was razor sharp. Criminal charges. Elder abuse in the first degree carries a sentence of up to 15 years. Add in the fraud, the tax evasion, the theft. You're looking at potentially decades in prison. All turned to me, and for a moment I saw a flash of the little girl she used to be. The one who would climb into my lap when she was scared. Mom, please. You know I never meant to hurt you. I was just trying to keep the family together by stealing from me, by throwing me out of my own house, by calling me a freeloader while you were living off my property." Tears started flowing down her cheeks. Real tears this time. Not the calculated ones she'd used to manipulate me for years. I was scared. Jamal's business was failing and we were drowning in debt. I thought if I could just use the house equity to get us back on our feet, I'd pay you back everything. I never meant for it to go this far. When I asked, "When were you planning to tell me what you'd done? When were you going to pay me back? Or were you just going to let me believe I was a burden for the rest of my life?" She had no answer for that because we both knew the truth. She'd never planned to tell me. She'd planned to let me die, believing I was nothing more than a drain on her resources, never knowing that those resources had been mine to begin with. "The business was supposed to work," she whispered. "Jamal said we'd make enough money to pay everything back and more. But then the contracts fell through and the investors pulled out and suddenly we were losing everything. So you decided to lose me, too," I said quietly. Rochelle looked up at me, mascara streaking down her cheeks. "What do you want me to say? That I'm sorry I'm sorry? Mom, I'm so sorry. But I can't pay you $150,000. We're losing the house anyway. We have nothing left." Kendra leaned forward. "Actually, you do have options. The house, even in foreclosure, still has equity. If you sell it voluntarily, you could pay Mrs. Rhodes at least partially and avoid bankruptcy. Sell the house." R's voice was barely a whisper. "That's my children's home. Where am I supposed to live?" "You should have thought of that before you decided to gamble it away," I said. The cruelty in my voice surprised even me, but I didn't feel guilty about it. This woman had stolen my home, my security, my dignity. She'd made me feel worthless while profiting from my dependency. A little honesty about consequences was long overdue. Allah's lawyer cleared his throat. "My client needs time to consider the offer." 24 hours, Kendra said firmly. After that, we filed criminal charges. As we prepared to leave, Rochelle grabbed my arm. "Mom, wait. Please, can we talk privately, just for a minute?" I looked down at her hand on my arm, remembering all the times she'd pulled away when I tried to hug her, all the times she'd made me feel like my affection was unwelcome. "You can say whatever you need to say in front of the lawyers. I love you," she said desperately. "I know I've made mistakes, but I love you. You're my mother. Doesn't that count for something?" I studied her face, looking for some sign of genuine remorse, some indication that she understood the magnitude of what she'd done. All I saw was panic and self-preservation. Love isn't something you say, Rochelle. It's something you do. And everything you've done for the past 2 years has shown me exactly how much you love me. I gently removed her hand from my arm and walked toward the door. 24 hours, I said, without turning around. In the elevator, Kendra was quiet for a moment before speaking. "How are you feeling?" "Empty," I said honestly. I thought that confronting her would make me feel better, but it just makes me sad. She's not the daughter I raised. I don't know what happened to that little girl. Sometimes people show us who they really are when they're under pressure. Maybe she was always capable of this, and you just never saw it because she never needed to hurt you before. The elevator doors opened and I stepped out into the lobby into the rest of my life. Tomorrow would either sign the settlement agreement or face criminal prosecution. Either way, she'd finally understand that actions have consequences. But as I walked to my car, I realized something important. This had never really been about the money or the house or even justice. It had been about respect, about refusing to be treated as disposable, about standing up for myself after years of being diminished and dismissed. And in that regard, I'd already won. Whatever decided in the next 24 hours would determine her future, not mine. I'd already chosen mine. For the first time in years, I was free. The call came at 11:47 a.m., exactly 12 hours and 13 minutes before Kendra's deadline. I was lying in bed, not sleeping, when my phone buzzed with number Mom. Her voice was like she'd been crying for hours. I'll sign it. I'll sign the settlement. I sat up in the darkness of my small apartment, feeling strangely calm. All right, that's it. That's all you're going to say. What else is there to say? Rochelera, you made your choice a long time ago. Now you're living with the consequences. There was a long silence. Then in a voice so small, I almost didn't recognize it, she said, I really am sorry, Mom. I know you don't believe me, but I am. I believe you're sorry you got caught. That's not. She started, then stopped. Will you ever forgive me? I looked around my little apartment at the life I'd built from nothing after she'd thrown me away, at the independence I'd fought for, the dignity I'd reclaimed, the peace I'd found in not having to pretend I was wanted where I wasn't. I don't know, I said honestly, but that's not your decision to make anymore. I hung up and turned off my phone. The settlement signing took place 3 days later. Rochelle looked like she'd aged 10 years since our confrontation. She signed every page without argument, her hand shaking slightly as she wrote her name over and over again. The terms were straightforward. She would sell the house within 90 days and pay me $85,000 from the proceeds. The remaining $65,000 would be paid in monthly installments of $1,200 for 5 years. If she missed a single payment, the full amount would become due immediately and I could pursue criminal charges. The house will probably sell for around $320,000 in the current market, Kendra explained as we reviewed the papers. After paying off the mortgages and real estate fees, there should be enough to cover your initial payment and leave them with a small amount to relocate. All's lawyer had negotiated that small mercy. Enough money for a security deposit on an apartment somewhere. I hadn't objected. I wasn't trying to destroy her completely, just ensure she could never hurt me again. As we prepared to leave the lawyer's office for the final time, Rochelle caught up with me in the hallway. Mom, I know you probably don't want to hear from me, but Jalen and Maya, they miss you. They don't understand why you're not around anymore. I stopped walking. What did you tell them? That we had a disagreement about money? They don't know about all this. I couldn't explain it to them without admitting what I did. You're still lying. I'm protecting them. They're just kids. They don't need to know their mother is a thief. I turned to face her fully. No. You're protecting yourself just like you always have. Her face crumpled. What am I supposed to tell them when we have to move? when their friends ask why we lost our house. The truth would be a good start. But I know that's not your style. I walked away, but her voice followed me down the hallway. They love you, Mom. Whatever you think of me, don't punish them for my mistakes. I didn't answer, but her words stayed with me as I drove home. 2 months later, I moved into my new place, a small but beautiful cottage on the other side of town. It had a garden where I could grow vegetables, a front porch with a swing, and most importantly, it was mine. Completely, legally, undeniably mine. I was planting tomatoes in my backyard when I heard the gate creak. I looked up to see Jalen standing there, taller than I remembered, holding a small wrapped package. Grandma. I sat down my tail and stood up, brushing dirt from my hands. Jalen, how did you find me? I asked around. Mrs. Jenkins from your old building told me where you lived. He looked nervous, uncertain. I hope it's okay that I came. It's more than okay. Come here. He ran to me then, and I hugged him tight, breathing in the familiar scent of his shampoo, feeling how much he'd grown in just a few months. I brought you a birthday present, he said, pulling back and offering me the package. I know I missed your actual birthday, but I wanted you to have something. Inside was a framed photo of the two of us from last Christmas morning before everything fell apart. We were sitting on the couch, and I was showing him how to knit. Both of us were laughing at something, our heads bent together in concentration. I found it on my phone, he said quietly. I thought maybe you'd want to remember that not everything about our family was bad. I felt tears prick my eyes. Thank you, sweetheart. This is perfect. We sat on my porch swing, and Jalen told me about school, about baseball season starting, about Maya getting her driver's permit, normal teenage things that felt precious because I thought I'd never hear them again. Mom says you're not talking to us anymore because of some fight about money, he said eventually. I chose my words carefully. Your mother and I had some serious disagreements about respect and honesty. Sometimes adults make choices that change relationships permanently. But you'll always be my grandma, right? Even if you and Mom can't work things out. I put my arm around him, pulling him close. Always. That will never change. No matter what happens between your mother and me. Good, he said, relaxing against my side, because I was scared I'd lost you forever. You could never lose me, Jalen, ever. He stayed for 2 hours, helping me plant the rest of my garden and catching me up on everything I'd missed. When it was time for him to go, he hugged me tight. Can I come back? Maybe bring Maya next time if she wants to come. Anytime. This is your safe place now. Both of you. After he left, I sat on my porch as the sun set, holding the framed photo he'd given me. It was true. Not everything about our family had been bad. There had been love there. Real love. Even if it had gotten twisted and poisoned by greed and manipulation. My phone buzzed with a text from Kendra. First payment received and cleared. A $200 exactly on time. I smiled and deleted the message. Rochelle was keeping up her end of the bargain. At least for now. The money was nice. But it wasn't really about the money anymore. It was about the principle. About consequences. about refusing to be a victim. 6 months later, Maya came to visit. 2, hesitant at first, but warming up when she realized I wasn't going to lecture her about her mother or try to turn her against her family. We baked cookies and talked about college plans and boys, normal grandmother, granddaughter things. Mom seems sad all the time now, Maya confided as we cleaned up the kitchen. She cries when she thinks we can't see her. I'm sorry to hear that, I said, and I meant it. I'd never wanted to destroy just to protect myself from her. Do you think you'll ever forgive her? It was the same question had asked me that night on the phone, and I still didn't have a good answer. Forgiveness is complicated, honey. Sometimes people hurt us so badly that even if we want to forgive them, trust is broken forever. And without trust, relationships can't really work. Maya nodded thoughtfully. She keeps asking about you, wanting to know if you're okay, if you're happy. What do you tell her? That you seem happier than I've seen you in a long time. Is that bad? I hugged her close. No, sweetheart. That's honest. And honesty is never bad. A year after the settlement was signed, I received an unexpected visitor. Yvonne, my sister, stood on my doorstep looking embarrassed and uncertain. I know I don't have any right to ask, she said. But could we talk? I made us tea and we sat in my living room, the tension thick between us. I owe you an apology, Yvonne said finally. A big one. I knew something was wrong that Christmas night, but I was a coward. I let throw you out because it was easier than standing up to her. Why are you here now? Yvonne, because called me last week crying? She told me what she did about the house and the money and all of it. She said, you found out and made her pay it back. Yvonne shook her head. I had no idea how bad it was. I thought it was just a family squabble about money. And now I know my little sister was being abused by her own daughter. And I stood by and let it happen. I'm ashamed of myself. Belinda, I'm so sorry. It felt good to hear the apology, but it didn't change what had happened. Thank you for saying that. Is there any chance could we try to rebuild our relationship? I know I don't deserve it, but I miss you. I miss having a sister. I looked at Yvonne, remembering all the years when we'd been close, when we'd supported each other through their mother's death and the struggles of raising families. One moment of cowardice didn't erase a lifetime of sisterhood. We can try, I said. But things are different now. I'm different now. She nodded, tears in her eyes. I understand. And Belinda, I'm proud of you for standing up for yourself. It couldn't have been easy. It was the hardest thing I've ever done, but also the most necessary. That evening, as I watered my garden in the fading light, I thought about forgiveness and family and the price of peace. I'd built a good life for myself, a quiet life full of small pleasures and genuine relationships. Jalen and Maya visited regularly. Yvonne and I were slowly rebuilding our connection. I had enough money to live comfortably, a home that was truly mine, and most importantly, my self-respect. All continued to make her payments on time, every month like clockwork. We'd had no contact since the settlement signing, and I was content to keep it that way. Some bridges once burned couldn't be rebuilt, and some relationships once poisoned couldn't be healed. But I was no longer angry. Anger was exhausting. And I'd wasted too many years of my life on negative emotions. Instead, I felt something I hadn't experienced in a very long time. Contentment.
I was free. Free from manipulation. Free from being taken for granted. Free from pretending that being treated badly was better than being alone. It turned out that being alone wasn't scary at all. It was peaceful. And for the first time in my 66 years, I was exactly where I belonged. 2 years later, on my 67th birthday, I received a card in the mail with no return address. Inside, in Allah's handwriting, were just 4 words. I understand now. Sorry. I read it twice, then put it in my junk drawer and went back to tending my roses. Some apologies come too late to matter. Some relationships end not with dramatic confrontations or grand gestures, but with quiet acceptance that some things simply can't be fixed. And sometimes that's exactly as it should be. I was no longer anyone's burden, anyone's obligation, anyone's disappointment. I was just Carolyn Rhodes living her life on her own terms, and that was more than enough. Now, I'm curious about you who listened to my story. What would you do if you were in my place? Have you ever been through something similar? Comment below. And meanwhile, I'm leaving on the final screen 2 other stories that are channel favorites, and they will definitely surprise you. Thank you for watching until here.